Hello, everybody. Welcome to this special live Midnight's Edge. How's it going? I'm your narrator supreme, Mr. Rob Robot Shlomo. With me, as always, joining us from the After Dark channel is Mr. Tom Connors.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, good evening, good whatever, wherever you're listening to. And with us is the one, the only, the boss man, Andre.
Greetings, everyone.
Okay, and we have the honor today of being joined by a very special guest who he made an admission that he's a fan of ours. Not many people do that these days. Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, hello. It's great to be here, and yes, I actually am a fan of you guys, and I especially appreciate the time and effort you put into your epic videos. You know, I think you have production value that not a lot of YouTubers have. It's great.
Thank you so much. That means a lot coming from you.
Yes, we appreciate you taking the time to join us. We know you're very busy. Your time is limited, so let's just jump right in. Andre,
Yes,
you take it away.
Thank you. I have one question before we begin with the topic of today, which is the first 5 episodes of Star Trek Discovery. And the reason why we're talking about those is that they mark the end of the reign of the second batch of showrunners associated with Star Trek Discovery. But before we get to that, Rob,
I thought you were going to say Reign of Terror. Because that's kind of how I feel about it.
Oh, this is going to be a good one. But before we get to that, we recently released this huge video, this 15-minute beast, where we went through the rights situation and everything it implies in detail. Now, I know that you had something to say about that on your own channel, which I hope that as many of our viewers as possible have seen. If not, go and subscribe to Rob's channel and follow that regularly. But for those that haven't seen it yet, what do you think about the revelations that we made as pertains to the Prime and Kelvin timeline and the canons of Star Trek?
Well, first of all, I thought that it was very interesting, first of all. And I grew up I would consider myself a canonista. You know, Star Trek canon was very important to me. And because that was part of the fun of Star Trek, was that when I was a kid, you had was the original series. You had the 79 episodes, and then later you had the animated series. And I was a kid that would read the best of Trek anthologies. There was a magazine called Trek for Star Trek fans, but they would publish these paperbacks of essays that were deep dive essays into the Star Trek universe. And they would reconcile things like, well, there's the United Earth Space Probe Agency, and then there's the United Federation of Planets. How did those two things work together? Because, of course, as Star Trek was being created, they would change things, and things went along and they would morph because they didn't know. These things were not all written in stone. Hence James R. Kirk, where no one has gone before on the tombstone. So Star Trek canon was always something that was evolving. So that's something that I've always been aware of. But as I got older and you'd get the blueprints and Star Trek the Motion Picture, to me, one of the greatest things about Star Trek canon was how they treated Star Trek the Motion Picture. It was not a reboot. It was a brand new, huge sci-fi epic film where they actually brought the same cast forward from the television show, and what was considered a failed television show at that. However, there was so much care that was taken by the production team of Star Trek the Motion Picture to update it and to modernize it and yet pay reverence and homage to what had come before. And I remember as a kid seeing Star Trek the Motion Picture. I mean, I'd pored over the Bijo Trimble Concordance, and I had read every Star Trek novel and all of this stuff. And they're watching the filmmakers have such reverence for what had come before. I mean, look, when William Shatner steps out of the shuttle in Star Trek the Motion Picture in San Francisco and he's wearing that Admiral uniform, we had never seen anything like that before in Star Trek. But that uniform was amazing. I mean, it looked great. He looked great, and it felt like a logical extension of what had come before. So that's sort of where I'm coming from when it comes to Star Trek. And what was really interesting is as we've had the canonical shows, Star Trek, the original series, all the way up through Enterprise in 2005, the people that always worked on Star Trek were trying to, as much as they could, or as much as their talent would allow them to, they were trying to find ways to create a unified whole. They didn't always work, obviously. I mean, Zefram Cochrane in First Contact is not Glenn Corbett from the second season episode Metamorphosis. Those characters were very different, but we had Zefram Cochrane portrayed. Still, they were trying to tie things back into the original universe until Star Trek 2009. And what was interesting about your reporting, what I really liked, what I've enjoyed about your reporting is at least you guys are trying to figure things out, make connections. And I've appreciated the sleuthing that you guys have gone through to sort of look into the Star Trek rights situation. I mean, when the rights were bifurcated, in 2005, the whole Viacom split.
Yeah.
That was a very strange thing that had really never happened before in pop culture history. There's nothing analogous of what happened with Star Trek really anywhere else. Now, knowing what I know about the entertainment business, when J.J. Abrams and Bad Robot came in and took over the franchise, these are people that are very successful television producers already. I mean, J.J. Abrams, he created Felicity, and he had a long track record and had a very lucrative experience making television shows. So when you're going to take over Star Trek because of the way it had been for the better part of 50 years at that time, of course, if you're going to make a Star Trek movie, you are going to make considerations because it's Star Trek about a new television show. All of that would be part of the deal that they were trying to strike. Merchandising, all of that. I mean, Star Trek has been around for 50 years. It's one of the greatest, now more, but one of the greatest entertainment franchises ever. With all of that merchandising, you've got a built-in hardcore fan base that's always going to show up and watch what you've done. So it better be good. But then there's this thought. What was very interesting to me is that rather go back and create something new that we hadn't seen before, they were going to go back and show us Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Sulu, Uhura, Chekhov. And they were going to go back to what was already known, which in my mind was a really strange thing to do, considering Star Trek up until that point, all the shows had, while they were tied together, they were all creating new characters, new ships. Basically, they were adding to the IP. Now, what they did with Star Trek 09 is they're going to go back to the beginning, but they were Bad Robot was not just going to go back and recreate something without a stake in it. They had to make it worth their while. Now, I was not privy to, I've not talked to a lawyer necessarily about what was done officially. But to me, it goes without saying that if you're involved in an entertainment concern and you're Bad Robot and you're going to reinvent Star Trek, you're going to want to make it your own. That's why, for instance, you saw the J.J. Abrams did the same thing with Star Wars. C-3PO has a red arm. The Millennium Falcon has a rectangular dish. Let's not use R2-D2. Let's put a tarp over him and let's create BB-8, something that we own, because they have a fat slice of the merchandising rights off the new characters that they created for the series. I mean, they're smart. And after what happened with Star Trek and CBS, I'd heard from people that were working at CBS, Bad Robot wanted to get rid of all Star Trek merchandising, like you guys reported. All of Star Trek merchandising that had nothing to do with their Star Trek, meaning the last almost 50 years of Star Trek history, we would no longer have any merchandise made from that. That's what Bad Robot originally wanted. And of course, CBS is like, no way. We still make this amount of money from our merchandising for our 50-year-old show. So that to me told me that there was definitely some shenanigans going on in terms of what they wanted to do. And the idea that, yeah, let's change the scale of ships. And there were wholesale changes made to Star Trek that were, in my mind, sort of strange, especially because you had Star Trek novels, like Shatner wrote a book with the Reeve Stevens called Collision Course, which was a great book about how Kirk and Spock originally met at Starfleet Academy. It was basically the Star Trek 09 story, but written, it was much better, by the way, than what we eventually got on the movie screen. So that it has always interested me what's going on. And I've known people who've worked on Star Trek a lot. And then when I took over and worked with Roger Lay Jr., we were creating, even though they were only documentary pieces, but for the Star Trek The Next Generation Blu-rays, we were the only people creating brand new Star Trek material programming for 3 years. And that was the documentary stuff for both Enterprise and for The Next Generation, where we interviewed everybody involved from Rick Berman on down, anybody that would talk to us. But we did hundreds of hours of interviews. And we had our own dedicated legal team, our own Paramount legal team, 2 lawyers that would have to vet everything that we did. Because nobody, if you said something that they didn't like, we would have to cut it out. And for the most part, they left us alone. There were only 2 times in the entire project where I was told I could not say, I could not include material in this conversation. And the first time I was told that, I actually hosted a roundtable discussion on camera that's on the 2nd season set. It was an hour-long 25th anniversary reunion of all of the major, the principal cast of Next Gen. And at the end of that conversation, they started talking about the Star Trek 09 reboot. This was, by the way, this is in 2012. We were recording this in 2012, so it was the same year that Into Darkness, was it right? Into Darkness came out in 2012?
That was 2014, wasn't it? No, 2013.
I think 2013.
Was it 2013? So it was being, okay, so Into Darkness was in production. And so the J.J. Abrams movies had come up at the end of the conversation, and the cast was riffing on what would it be like if we got rebooted the same way that the original cast had been rebooted in Star Trek 09. It was very funny. And Patrick Stewart made a joke. Well, I know what it's like because I'm already working with James McAvoy, who's playing a young Professor X in the X-Men movies. So I know what it's like to have my own character rebooted by another actor. And it was very charming. And there was a riff from all of them. Well, I got a note back from the legal team saying, you cannot talk about this at all. You cannot mention anything about Star Trek 09. And you cannot mention anything about the J.J. Abrams Star Trek, which in my mind was such a weird thing to get. Because why not? I mean, it's not like it's not real. And these were documentary pieces. Like, why couldn't we keep this riff? Nope. I had to cut it out. And I was like, that was the first time that I realized, oh, there is a line in the sand that has been drawn within CBS about Bad Robot's version of Star Trek and the canon of Star Trek. Never the two shall meet. And that's when I was first given an indication that, wow, there is some kind of a wall there. Now, that's why I found your reporting so interesting, because I butted up against it in a professional capacity while working on Star Trek for CBS. And I always thought that was, no one will ever tell you exactly what is going on, because they keep that stuff very close to the vest. But I mean, I was told we couldn't do that. And on one hand, it was sad because the who loses out are the fans. And it was fun to hear that. Like, why wouldn't you want to hear about that? It was so innocuous. It was such a fun conversation. Nobody was critical of J.J. Abrams or Bad Robot. It was just fun to muse, like, what would happen if we were rebooted, and who wouldn't want to know?
I'd love to know. I'd love to see that discussion.
Yeah, it was fun. It was at the end. It was wrapping up everything, and so that's when I realized that there is definitely whatever that is, whatever they carved out. And it made sense to me because anybody that works in the entertainment industry would understand that. If you're going to reboot a giant entertainment franchise like Star Trek, you want the cheddar. You want to get that cash. You're not doing it for your own edification. You're doing it to make money. The studio was hoping to make money. Certainly Bad Robot was hoping to make money. They wanted to make a lot of money off the merchandising. But that, as you guys also reported, that didn't work out the way they wanted it to, because CBS was not going to discontinue selling the merchandise they've been making money off of for almost 50 years. And the merchandise they made of Star Trek 09 simply just didn't sell well because it wasn't good merchandise. It's like nobody was overseeing the quality. The Playmates figures, it was so strange to see Playmates that had done so well with the Star Trek brand crash and burn so spectacularly with the merchandise they made for Star Trek 09. I mean, look at any Chris Pine figure from that set. It's like, what is this? Did anyone bother to look at a likeness of Chris Pine before they made these figures? They certainly were not Playmates. They were not putting their best foot forward, and they certainly didn't live up to what they'd done with the franchise previously, which was too bad. And then, of course, there's the debacle of the video game, the Star Trek video game that Bad Robots, they distanced themselves from when it didn't turn out as well as they had hoped. And as I pointed out, you couldn't even get a model kit of the Enterprise from Star Trek 09. They made one for Into Darkness, and they still haven't released it officially in the United States. It was only available through Revell Germany. And when I tried to buy one from Amazon UK, I had to go to a secondary seller. You can get the kit now from places like Cult TV Man, but there are licenses. You had Mobius and Round 2 that were making Star Trek model kits here in the States, and they didn't have the license to make one. Now they're just coming out with a Kelvin model now, which was weird. So after your reporting about this, I went to, let's just say, just about the highest source I know about this issue. And I asked somebody who is deeply, deeply, deeply involved with the, let's just say, deeply involved with the development and production of Star Trek Discovery. And I said, were you at all confined? Were you constrained by any deal, or were you trying to make canonical Star Trek? And the answer was unequivocal. Yes, unequivocal. Yes, we were making canonical Star Trek. That's how it started. And when it changed, and when perhaps people that I might have spoken to were no longer involved with the show directly, and Alex Kurtzman sort of took over, something changed. And in my mind, it would be that, okay, well, Kurtzman was involved. They came up with a story for the Countdown comics, Star Trek 09, where this new universe began. And as you guys did in your reporting and you pointed out, that's when whatever was going on with Star Trek 09, there was a new deal made. And that new deal was they had carved out their own, let's just say, universe, their own Star Trek universe to work from. And I am convinced that you're reporting. I don't know exactly how accurate the 25% number is. I mean, John Eves, of course, said that, but everything he was saying, whether his number was correct or not, what he said was absolutely correct, that we have to make things that are different. That's the real takeaway, is that John Eves said, yes, we have to make these things different because it's not canonical. Yeah. Because we saw. What's so funny is that I don't understand why they want to pull the wool over everyone's eyes. Just come out and say it. Like what we as Star Trek fans are used to multiverses, and that whole idea is I think, was it you guys that showed John Van Sitter's tweet that said,
yes,
everything is the Star Trek in the Star Trek multiverse? And look,
yes, that was us.
John Van Sitters and Marion Cordry are great. They have done such a great job of stewarding for CBS Consumer Products of the Star Trek brand. And I work with them a lot on the Next Generation. Whenever they would need still frames or things, I would give them frame grabs, and they're great. I love what John was really instrumental in keeping the publishing arm going, and I dearly love my Star Trek novels. There's been so many great Star Trek novels written. Why anyone ever goes back and looks at the best of the novels in creating new Star Trek, I don't know. But yeah, so John Van Sitters, when he tweeted that tweet is very interesting to me, because what's so funny is that the people that are making this stuff now don't care. I mean, they want to make a good TV show, although that's debatable, but they don't care what canonical Star Trek is. They're making their own show. They don't. One of the constraints that the writers always talked about when we were doing the documentaries was that Ron Moore and Brandon and Renee and Noreen would talk about Star Trek canon is so crushing when you're trying to tell stories. And so why they wouldn't just say, we are going to, I was hoping what they would do, what they do with Galactica, which is just basically reconceptualize the ideas. And, the Battlestar Galactica looks redolent in Ron Moore's version of the original Galactica, but it's clearly not. But it's still, it's still recognizable as the Battlestar Galactica. So you could go back and reboot Star Trek from the ground up. And everybody, I don't think the fan base would have a problem with that. They would just know that, okay, this is a different Star Trek universe. It's like in the Next Generation episode Parallels. It's one of the many Star Trek universes we've already seen canonically in the show, but it is not the Star Trek timeline that we've been following from 1966 to 2005. I wouldn't have had a problem with that. The Kelvinverse, as much as I dislike all three of those movies for various reasons, it's still, I wasn't going, well, that's not, they're violating Star Trek canon, because they're not. It's their new universe. But what's so annoying to me about Star Trek Discovery is there's when you watch the Enterprise show up in Trials and Tribulations, and they actually go back and integrate the Deep Space Nine cast into old footage from the second season of TOS from the 67-68 season, when you see that the care and the love that was put into those episodes, and how Greg Jean built a model of the D7 and built a new model of the Enterprise and of K7, and you saw the love with which they approached that. That's what we expect as fans from Star Trek. And now it feels like everything we're getting is sort of a slap in the face, and that's because they're playing this game with us. And that's what I object to, that I feel like we're being toyed with for no reason at all. And it becomes maddening. I guess that's the end of my rant.
And an excellent rant it was.
Can I ask one quick question, perhaps? From your source, did you ever get any information on possibly what happened between Brian Fuller and the production? Was he ousted? Was he fired? Did he leave? And what exactly brought Kurtzman in the new deal? Do you know anything about that?
I do, and I can't really talk about that, but I can say this. I believe that when Les Moonves was involved with rebooting Star Trek, he thought, and I will give you a quote that was given to me by, let's just say, that relatively high-ranking source. Les Moonves says, well, why can't you just do this new show like they did the original Star Trek and not spend much money on special effects? And why can't you do it really on the cheap, the way the original Star? Why does it have to be so expensive? And I think that CBS had, Les Moonves and the people at CBS had no conception of how expensive a Star Trek show is to produce. And there is this perception, by the way, I think that's me. There's water running in the background. I apologize. There is a perception that the original Star Trek was somehow a cheap show with cheap effects, and nothing can be further from the truth. I mean, when Star Trek was made and the original series was made, it was incredibly, it was very sophisticated. I mean, they're using blue screen photography for the models. There was no expense spared. And while they figured out how to maximize costs, it was not by any means a cheap show. And what people have to understand when you're making television is that when you're doing a show like Star Trek Discovery, every single thing has to be manufactured from scratch. Costumes, sets. You can't go buy, chairs from the future off at your local IKEA. All of these things have to be designed and fabricated. And when you make a Star Trek show, you amortize the costs of all of that across all of your episodes. So each episode that you make, you'll say the bridge costs, I don't know, $10 million as a set to build. Well, when you're doing 15 episodes in a season, you pay for a chunk of the bridge out of each episode's budget. But in the case of Star Trek Discovery, I think CBS was unprepared for how much, because they're looking at the good fight. They're making other shows for CBS All Access, and they weren't going to be nearly as expensive because you don't have those massive upfront startup costs that you do with the Star Trek show. And another thing under the Berman era is that all of the Star Trek shows that were made were able to repurpose all of the stuff that came before, like famously the engineering, the intermix chamber of the Starship Voyager was the intermix chamber from the Enterprise from Star Trek the Motion Picture. So they could repurpose all kinds of things for Star Trek. But with Star Trek Discovery, they didn't have anything left. So
they could repurpose some things. I know, for instance, that the consoles in Star Trek Discovery are recycled from the ones used in Star Trek Beyond.
Right, of course.
On the USS, the old ship.
Franklin.
Franklin, that's the one, yeah.
Right, but that was all they had. I mean, they only had, they had stuff that was made. And, they didn't, which was great. I mean, they were able to avail themselves of that stuff, but then they built a bridge with all kinds of, I mean, that bridge requires an incredible amount of production to shoot on with all the displays and everything that's going on. It's not, the show is very expensive to make. And I think part of the reason that the original showrunners were ousted was because they were blamed for how much the show was going to cost. It ended up costing them a lot more in that ouster. But I think that I would guess, because Alex Kurtzman was always involved somehow. When he came in, and they I also know for a fact how much in Discovery I'll give you an example. The tardigrade character that we met in the first season was a crew member on the Discovery named Ephraim. And he was Stamets' right-hand man. He was essentially Chewbacca to Stamets. He was a character in the original conception of the show. If you read, let's say I might have the 150 pages of the original outline for all 13 episodes of Discovery. Let's say I might have access to that. And the first two scripts, one was written by Brian Fuller and the other was written by Nicholas Meyer. Let's just say I had all
hypothetically,
if I had all that stuff and read it all, there was no spore drive. The whole thing about the micellular network, that was all about terraforming. I mean, if you think about it, it makes utterly no sense at all that there's some fungal network throughout the universe. All of that was a result of what they took the original conception of the show from the original showrunner and sort of used. They didn't want to start from scratch, but they cherry picked what they had and then they altered everything, and in my mind just made it gobbledygook. The spore drive is the greatest, to me, in my mind, example. Like, why would you do that? I mean, it's from a science fiction point of view, from a scientific point of view, from the point of view of plausible storytelling, it makes utterly no sense at all. And the tardigrade character, as originally conceived, was really interesting. You had it harked back to Diane Duane, who's a Star Trek novelist. In her novel, she put a Horta character on the Enterprise, Ensign Narat. There was a Starfleet ensign who was actually a Horta. One of the Hortas from Janus 6, from Devil in the Dark, joined Starfleet. And I always loved that idea. I'm like, why wouldn't they? Why couldn't you have a silicon life form on the Enterprise as a crew member? So it was always kind of neat to me that they had a true alien creature that was going to be on the Discovery as part of the crew. But then there were concerns about how much that would cost on a weekly basis. Whenever you showed the tardigrade, that was going to cost a lot of money because it was going to be done via CG. So they took the idea of the tardigrade and then they reconceptualized it into something that was stupid. That made no it made no sense. It was like, okay, somebody watched Dune, or somebody, I know we're transitioning into this whole Discovery thing, but it's like the beginning of the first episode when you have Georgiou and Burnham walking through the desert, which, by the way, the scene was not in the original version of the script. They're walking through the desert and they walk a Starfleet insignia into the ground so they can be spotted from orbit while there's a storm blowing through the desert. But no, just because there's a storm coming and there's wind blowing, that the design they're making is going to last to the point where it can be recognized from orbit. I mean, it was stuff like that from that first episode that just became dumber and dumber and dumber, to the point where now it's just, hey, it's Alice in Wonderland. I mean, it's just, anyway, I don't want to turn your viewers off by just going off on a rant. But look, Star Trek Discovery is a beautifully produced show with a cast that I think is actually quite good. And I'm a huge fan of Anson Mount, because he's about the only person who is written to know they're actually on a Star Trek show. But the rest of Star Trek Discovery has just been, in my mind, a battle between the people that have already left, that they were trying to sort of mine what was done before, and then the new people that are trying to make it their own. And who loses is the audience, because the storytelling is nonsensical, and it baffles me. These first 5 episodes of Discovery, when you try and tell me that 5 signals? What are they calling them? Signals? 5 signals?
7 signals. The red angels, whatever. Yeah.
That 7 signals appeared throughout the galaxy at the same time. I'm like, how would you know that? The distance from where you are here in the Alpha Quadrant is different from where all those signals are. You wouldn't know that those signals all appeared at the same time. It would take, well, let's face it, hundreds, if not thousands of years to see those signals anyway. Let's talk about just the speed of light.
Yeah, 100,000 light years, I believe the Milky Way is across. So we're talking up to 100,000 years.
And yet these signals appeared all in the same 24 hours. Now, me as a fan of science and rudimentary scientific or science fiction storytelling, I'm like, that doesn't make any sense at all. So the premise you have for your show for the second season, that these signals showed up, I'm like, this is dumb. I'm now being insulted as a viewer, because first of all, where are you getting this from? Do you have a listening post that's above the entire Milky Way? Like, how are you? And I know this is a little thing, but this is what they're asking me to believe as a viewer. Now, when you're making a science fiction, fantasy, or horror show, the first thing you need to do is set up plausible. We need to suspend our disbelief. They've already lost me with the spore drive. They've already lost me with so many other things in the first season, that when you ask to begin this new show and your premise of these 7 signals is already nonsensical to begin with, I'm like, why wasn't there somebody in the writer's room going, that would be a difficult thing to get. The signals are not all equidistant. So the idea that you'd get this signal all at the same time is bad science. And it's Star Trek, they even had science advisors on the show in the Next Generation during the Berman era. That particular advisor now works on the Orville, but
like so many others of those who used to work on Trek before.
Yeah, and I watch this stuff, and it just bothers me. It bothers me that we are being given something that is strange. It strains credulity from the get-go. And this final episode, Tilly gets swept down. I was expecting to see the White Rabbit from Shore Leave, with this. We're down into Wonderland through the magic mushrooms of space, and it just bothers me. It bothers me. And it continues to bother me.
Right.
I'll give you another example. So if you're stuck in a church during a firefight or whatever, and some red angel decides to whisk your church away with whoever was in it of 51,000 light years, and why 51,000 light years? Why not 10,000 light years? But anyway, whisk your church across the quadrant and drop you off. Why would then suddenly you create a polytheist scripture? You're going to rewrite scripture, but you're going to include Wiccan, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and you're gonna toss all of this up into one heady broth and rewrite scripture. That's what we're asked to believe in that second episode. Who would do that? In what facet of human history or what area has that ever happened before? So the very idea that I would have come up with something like that in a 7th grade class. What if all religions were able to write their own religion based on, you know, they're all their scriptures. Because of course the Wiccans would have the same beliefs as Islam, that would have the same beliefs as Judeo-Christian. I mean, none of it makes any sense. And I watch this and I'm like, I don't believe that. I don't believe what they're telling me. And I keep getting asked to believe things that I can't, as a viewer, believe in. And they just compound episode after episode. Whatever happened to Section 31 as a clandestine, ultra super secret? I mean, a Sloan will just appear in your room when you're sleeping. And then he just disappears when he walks out the door. Now, apparently, Section 31, you have an American Express card, a black card. It's just, it's your comm badge or whatever. I mean, come on. Give me, if you we've already seen Section 31. They're badass. But apparently now everybody knows about them. Everybody knows about Section 31. Why?
Well, I'm thinking the reasoning behind that is, well, somebody in the writer's room must have said, well, everybody knows about the CIA. But yeah, okay, but we don't know who works for the CIA, or, you know, there's even like Task Force 21 or like Delta Recon, which are super secret within the military. So even that doesn't make sense. And I'll even do you one better on that episode, the second episode. They mentioned the Prime Directive General Order 1 repeatedly, and yet they beamed down into the middle of a village, right into the middle instead of on the edge of it.
Oh my God. The worst, but they're in the graveyard. Like, they're right outside the church. They don't even like walk in. It's like, what? Right with you. I was so mad. That made me so angry.
Yeah, I agree with one thing about the Section 31 thing. That actually reminded me of another movie and another YouTuber altogether. You know what that is? That's a Star Trek equivalent of BAT credit card.
Right. Yeah, I guess here's the thing. Star Trek, when they introduced in Next Generation, they waited. You had DeForest Kelley on Encounter at Farpoint for the pilot. And the next time they brought a character back from the original series was Mark Leonard playing Sarek. And they didn't even, there's only one mention of Spock in that episode, in the episode Sarek. One mention. And the story they tell, if you didn't know who Sarek was, the story still really worked. It's a beautiful story. Aging Vulcan ambassador who's losing his mind. You know, but it's an Alzheimer's story. What's it like for people to deal with Alzheimer's? And it was a beautiful episode. But now it's like they just expect us to love all this stuff because, oh yeah, here's a Tribble. Oh, here's a Gorn skeleton. As if we're supposed to go, haha, we love that. As if we don't care. We're not discerning viewers. It's like I'm supposed to be happy there's a Tribble on Lorca's desk. Why didn't he eat all of Lorca's fortune cookies? Why aren't there a million Tribbles now on the Discovery? I mean, it's just, I'm not happy just to see something like a Tribble, and I don't smile because of it. This is not good storytelling. To me, it's like, okay, if you're going to pull it, it's like the old adage, if you're going to pull a gun, you better use it. If you're going to pull a Tribble, if you're going to have a Tribble, there's a whole list of questions that I have as a viewer about Tribbles. Okay, wait a minute. This Tribble is sitting on a table right next to a food source. And we all know what happens when you feed Tribbles. You get a lot more Tribbles. So I'm asking myself for 15 episodes of the first season of Discovery, when is that Tribble going to reproduce? You know, otherwise you guys have not, I mean, that could have been an ongoing joke that Lorca had been having. You find out that he'd been phasering the Tribbles that had been proliferating in his ready room. You know, that could have been a thing where you find out he's a Tribble murderer because he didn't know that Tribbles are an ecological menace and they reproduce so quickly. But they didn't do that. And I'm asking myself as a viewer, well, if you're going to have a Tribble, there's a whole series of things that go along with having a Tribble that you're not addressing. So as a viewer, it pisses me off. Why do you have a Tribble there if you're not going to accept what that means for your show? And I know that seems trivial, but you know, if you're going to have it there, you need to use it. If you're going to pull it, use it. And Discovery just throws things willy-nilly at us, and we're just expected to be like, oh, look, a Tribble. But no, a Tribble is an ecological menace. A Tribble isn't a bad thing just because it's a bad thing. It's just because it's purring and furry and nice. It doesn't mean that it's not a problem. It is a problem. but they don't ever address that. We're just supposed to smile and go, oh, look, it's a tribble because I'm a Star Trek fan. I hate that shit.
Yeah. What did you think about the TV spot they released where they were singing and telling all the fans that they're a bunch of nerds?
Oh, you know what? Here's the thing. When I was growing up, there was no, the people that watched Star Trek weren't nerds. I mean, there were college kids. There were people that went on to be scientists. I mean, the idea of nerd culture didn't exist, but it exists now. But that isn't true, because if you come onto my channel on the Burnett Network and listen to any of my chats, I say that we all live in the post-geek singularity. The world has gone, geek culture has gone mainstream. Everyone is a geek. That's why Infinity War made $2 billion worldwide. Everybody's a part of this culture. The idea that everyone is a nerd now is the most condescending, the most recidivist. It's just, what does that say about your audience? Your audiences are nerds. We live in a science fiction world now. We carry supercomputers in our pockets. You know, I mean, why is it that the audience that should be liking Star Trek Discovery should be the same audience that loves Breaking Bad, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, you know, Game of Thrones. Look, you watch The Expanse. The Expanse is a science fiction show that's based on a series of novels that is thoughtful. It's interesting. They do a good job of incorporating, for the most part, real science in terms of how they have ships move and things like that. We should be getting, Star Trek should be the Tiffany brand when it comes to science fiction television. It should be the top. And what we're getting now is we're getting storytelling that is in the wake. We're in a golden age of television now, streaming shows. There's so much great TV that we should be getting. Star Trek should be that gold standard. It should be that Tiffany standard of science fiction television. And what we're getting is not that. You know, we're getting and look, it isn't about whether it's inclusion or the fact that all these people are being represented. That's really great. And I'd go back and say, look, like I think Deep Space Nine had one of the greatest single father-son relationships ever on television. The fact that Avery Brooks and Srock Lofton are black was never really part of it. Race was never an issue in their relationship. It was just a great examination of a single father and his son. But the thing is, the way you do inclusion is you just include people. You show them doing their jobs and you show them being good at their jobs the way that Ben Sisko was. Ben Sisko kicked ass. And then when they did do Far Beyond the Stars and they addressed the issue of race head on, you'd already got 5 seasons of him being a badass. You know, and it wasn't the best way to show inclusion is to just show inclusion. Don't make it part of, I mean, Star Trek is always best when it's allegorical in nature. Let that be your last battlefield is not a great way to address race relations, you know, the black and white, depending on what side of your face you have it on. And, you know, Star Trek has always done that, moved up. And it's great that we have inclusion in the show, but when you're showing inclusion and then in the same time, you're setting up a Starfleet character as being a male douchebag just to kill him. That's really insidious to me. And you know, we make fun of how Star Trek had red shirts and they all die. Every time somebody died in Star Trek, it was a loss. You never smiled or laughed or thought a Starfleet officer deserved to die. Even crazy Matt Decker in the Doomsday Machine, you understood he was racked with guilt and he caused the death of his crew. And when he is lost at the end of the Doomsday Machine, it's not a good thing. And yet in that episode, the first season or the first episode of this season, we actually watch one of Pike's crew. Sure, it's not Spock, but it's the secondary science officer who presumably was a very valuable member of the Enterprise crew. He's introduced as being a douchebag, and 15 minutes later, he's showboating and he gets killed. and he gets killed in such a way where people are like, he deserved it. He was mansplaining. Since when is human life? When has Star Trek ever been casual with human life? Never. Until this season of Star Trek Discovery.
Yeah, that's where they lost me, just in that one scene, because that reminded me a little bit of The Last Jedi, where you kind of had like the same thing, where you had two characters. You had the female Holdo, and you had the, what's his name again? I keep forgetting the new Han Solo wannabe's name. Poe Dameron. Thank you.
Dameron,
yeah. Basically, his one and only purpose in that movie was to be mansplaining and be told off for it. And this was like a similar thing. Here is one that did not believe in the superiority of Michael Burnham, and he had to die for it and be a punchline in the process.
Yeah, and it's like, I get it. And now I read these articles about that was when Star Trek Discovery, planted a flag for everybody today. And I'm like, no, you know what it did? It made death casual. It made human life casual, that somebody deserves to die if they act a certain way or do something that isn't I don't know, correct. And to me, that's really insidious. And that was not what Star Trek was. Star Trek, if Star Trek told us nothing over the last 50 years, is that all human life is precious. Here's another thing. Star Trek never really had villains. It had antagonists. And if you look at how the Klingons were portrayed, when you meet Kor and Errand of Mercy, one of my, John Colicos as Kor is one of the great Klingons of all time. And at the end of that episode, you always see Kor not knowing who Kirk is at the beginning of that episode, when Kirk is dressed up in his Barona disguise. Kor has a respect for Kirk, not knowing Kirk is even a Starfleet captain yet, has respect for Barona. And you see that this Klingon character he's not some mustache twirling villain. He's a thoughtful, charismatic, interesting leader. And at the end of that episode, when the Organians put an end to the brewing war over Organia between the Klingons and the Federation, even Kor is like, kind of sucks that we don't get to fight it out, but it would have been glorious, and he says that, and you realize that these Klingons they're thoughtful characters. Even if you see, like, when the Klingons are introduced in Next Generation in the episode Heart of Glory in the first season, go back and watch that episode and see how the Klingons are portrayed when Vaughn Armstrong is playing, who we saw later all the way up through Enterprise. But Vaughn Armstrong is a Klingon, and he's trying to convince Worf, don't you hear that your blood boil? Don't you know what it means to be a Klingon? And you're like, these guys are awesome. Martok, what a great character. Gowron turns out to be a great character. And the Klingons were always best when they were multifaceted, and they were portrayed. They're not villains, they're antagonists, and there's a difference between the two. Anyway.
Yeah, I agree absolutely, completely in everything. And I also have to say to every single one who says that the first two seasons of The Next Generation were no good, well, screw you guys. Because no, not all episodes in those two first seasons were
love the
home
first
runs.
seasons,
But there are so many good episodes in them. Like the Klingon episode you mentioned, I would say that between the first two episodes of Next Generation, there are more good episodes than there are good episodes of the first two seasons of Star Trek Discovery.
Oh, I would agree with you. But I think with Star Trek Discovery, they are doing something different. They're finally embracing serialized storytelling, and that's to be honored. I mean, we saw that to a certain extent, obviously, in the third season of Enterprise, but then the entire Dominion War arc, seasons 5, 6, and 7 of Deep Space Nine, did a pretty good job of serializing the story. But what's really interesting is that we saw a galaxy-wide conflict in Deep Space Nine. We already saw what that would look like. And they did episodes like Homefront, where, you find out that Starfleet's compromising its core values because they think they've been infiltrated by the changelings. And in that episode, you find out one of the changelings chillingly says, do you know how many changelings are on Earth? 4. And we were able to accomplish, we've basically dismantled your way of life, and there's only 4 of us here. We didn't have to do anything. You did it all to yourselves. And that was that was far more compelling. I mean, now we've got it seems to me like the writing on Discovery has been tremendously dumbed down, or it's nonsensical. And when you see the great writing on so many other different TV shows, so much thought, it's maddening to watch Star Trek, just like this last episode, do all of this goofy stuff. Like, hey, no one has to die anymore because you're just really living in the Mushroom Network. You're in Wonderland, man. No one dies. We'll just bring characters back. I mean, when you watch that, I tune out. I tune out. You know, it's at least, I don't know. It makes me angry.
Well, if I can interject for a moment, I always say that there's an interview I go back to every so often where Frank Zappa, you know, Mother's Invention, everybody, where he says that back in the days of in the music industry, when you have all the experimental stuff, and this applies to television too, you didn't have the sort of hip, cool young executives making this stuff. It was the older guys like Alan Ladd Jr. who approved Star Wars, you know,
right? And
you know, they were the ones that were taking chances, and you know, Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball, they took a chance on Star Trek, and then they had some success. It's okay, let's get some hip, cool guy in here because we got to do more of it. And now you see all sort of the hip, cool guys writing for Discovery. They say, no, that's not what the audience wants. And I know. And it just seems like they are trying to write to a very specific kind of audience that doesn't want it to be the original Star Trek. They don't want it to be Next Generation, but they really don't know what it wants to be.
Right. I completely agree with it. They have no point of view. Their point of view is they're taking their point of view from a bunch of other different archetypes and characters from other shows. You know, like George Al is Cersei Lannister, you know, her mirror universe persona. And what's really interesting is that it's such a, if you look at how the mirror universe was portrayed first in Mirror Mirror, and there's that great moment where Spock says, you know, it's far easier for civilized men to behave like barbarians than it is for barbarians to behave as civilized men. And in a way, that has more intelligence and more insight into what the mirror universe should be than anything we're getting on this show. I mean, this is such a cartoon version of what the mirror universe is. I keep thinking that Mirror Georgiou should just, the Empress should just have her own theme music whenever she walks around, like the Jaws theme. It's just not nuanced, and it's not multi-dimensional, and it's frustrating to watch.
What I think is the most frustrating thing about it is thinking what might have been. Like, given the budget at hand, and that they were making a Star Trek series to promote CBS All Access, which of course is destined to fail, but anyway, they were making a Star Trek series, and they had that budget. Just think what could have been if they had hired in someone who knew and understood their Star Trek. Like, for instance, if they had you, for instance, to consult, and they had moved forwards rather than backwards. I mean, they could have been in their prime timeline. No one would have known the difference. No one would have cared for the difference as long as it was good. And that's the problem here. It isn't.
Well, and what's even more frustrating is that, you know, I have an upcoming show I'm going to drop where I interviewed Diane Duane, who is one of my favorite Star Trek novelists. But you have a whole pantheon of Star Trek novels. For instance, David Mack, who's one of my favorite Star Trek novelists, wrote 2 books about the mirror universe. He wrote this duology about the mirror universe. If you're going to do a story about the mirror universe, there is everything you possibly want to touch on is in his 2 novels. Now, CBS already owns them. They're there. So if you're going to do a whole season arc about the mirror universe and then keep mirror universe characters going, you would think that somebody would sit there and take the time to go read those books and plunder all of the great ideas that David Mack already laid out. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of Star Trek novels that lay out all these great ideas. And yet, as Diane Duane explained to me, no one would ever look to those books because it's like, why would you? I'm a TV writer. I'm working for television. And by the way, Star Trek Discovery is one of the highest budgeted television shows in the history of the medium. And it is incredibly expensive. But yet you get this idea that nobody, like Section 31, the way Section 31 is being depicted, there's Section 31 novels. Why wouldn't you go and check that out? I mean, the way we're getting a cartoon version of the Section 31 that was introduced in Deep Space Nine. And I can't suspend my disbelief. I can't buy into this Section 31 nonsense when I can go watch the BBC's Bodyguard, for instance, the 6-episode talk about dealing with clandestine affairs and MI6 and all that. I mean, there's so much other storylines and places that are providing beautifully written stories, and to watch Star Trek be so dumbed down is maddening. It's just maddening to me. And yet there's all this information that you could avail yourself of that's already out there as far as Star Trek is concerned, and you could be mining that. But no. I mean, hell, the DC Comics, when they brought the Star Trek license to DC in the early 80s, they did a 10-issue arc about the Mirror Universe. That was far more entertaining than what we got from Discovery. A comic book.
Frustrating thing is that they actually have mined other things. They just haven't mined what they should have. As you said, they should have mined the Star Trek novels and even other Star Trek comics. But instead, they seem to be mining indie games in development and other movies and other ideas from everywhere. Actually, we may do a whole separate video about all of the stuff that appear to be swiped from other places that weren't Star Trek and that had nothing to do with Star Trek.
Yeah, like the tardigrades being third stage guild navigators from Dune.
Yeah, for instance.
We've been covering that quite a bit over on After Dark. Yeah, sorry.
No, it's maddening, especially because, you know, we were having worked on Star Trek documentaries for 3 years for CBS. You know, part of why we were able to do what we were able to do is because we could speak extemporaneously about the shows to the people that created the shows. I could sit there and go, hey, in this episode, why did you guys choose to do this or something? Because we'd done the work. You know, we'd put in the time to know Star Trek. That's why we were hired to do what we were hired to do. And it's like, why would you hire people that it's almost like they're not right? They want to do anything but write Star Trek. And it's strange. Like, I think it'd be a creatively interesting thing to try and work your show into canon. I thought the idea, by the way, of the Discovery being based on the Macquarie Enterprise from Phil Kaufman's Planet of Titans was actually a really cool idea. I was really behind that idea until they even went and changed that and made, why does this primary hull have holes in it? You know, why can you fly a shuttle right through the hull of, how is there structural integrity there? And then they changed the nacelles because they didn't want nacelles that were round. Well, why? Why not? Why not make the nacelles look like they look canonically of the right era? I don't understand these decisions that are made, but that's just me. I'm not a showrunner.
Yeah, neither are the showrunners, let's say. Or at least not the first 5 episodes.
I mean, it's funny because the first 2 seasons of Star Trek: The Next Generation had a lot of tumultuous turnover in the writing staff and the people that were working on the show. It was a nightmare. Plus, during the second season, they had to deal with the 1988 writers' strike, which was difficult. So, this specifically the second season, they had a really rough time.
Yeah, they had to recycle episodes from phase 2, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. The Child, the first episode of the second season of TNG, was actually written for one of the 13 episodes that were written for the Star Trek Phase 2 series. They also later used Devil's Due, which was another script that they'd already owned. You know, they'd already developed those things. And yeah, that was a crazy time. So in a way, Star Trek Discovery has mirrored the rebirth of Star Trek with TNG, but they should know better. You know, they should know better. Whatever you think of the Berman era of Star Trek, Rick Berman produced 25 seasons of Star Trek. And one thing Rick Berman was on time and on budget every season. He might have spent more money, but he would make it up with his bottle shows. But at the end of the season, that was one well-produced, well-oiled machine that they had going for 25 seasons during the Berman era. And if I was going to make Star Trek Discovery, the first person I would call is Rick Berman and be like, hey, man, what should I look forward to? What are the pitfalls that we might have making a Star Trek show? And just pay him a consultant fee and sit him down and have him tell you everything that is problematic in making a weekly Star Trek series. Why would you do that?
That's a very good point, because he's doing something now like Kevin Feige did, but for however many years, like you said before, with, you know, basically 4 different shows overall, wasn't it? Between Next Generation and Enterprise. So that's just amazing at how somebody was able to keep something like that in check for all those years is astounding.
And they made 4 feature films, you know, with varying degrees
on top
of
it. Yeah.
And it's like the funny thing about Star Trek is, and it's kind of, I feel about Canon, like, why do you need to go, if you're making a Star Trek show, so much of your heavy lifting has already been done. The universe is already there. So you can concentrate on updating your stories that you're telling. Like, what I find really sort of depressing about modern Star Trek is they're not delving into stories that might have something to do with our world today. Like, for instance, transhumanism. When we can really start altering ourselves, and whether it's like the Borg touched on this, and we've seen sort of crew members that are biomechanical on the Discovery. But what does that mean? You know, what does that mean if you're a human being and you can start swapping out your body parts, or you can live longer? Or we're watching these shows are sort of all about, there is no, when you're watching Tilly hook herself up and have her imaginary friend from Mushroom Land there, that's not really an allegorical story that has anything to do with us today. You know, there's no, which is what all Star Trek did. Star Trek was dressing up modern social issues and delving into them within the confines of an action adventure science fiction show. But Star Trek got away with a lot. They couldn't talk about the Vietnam War on the air in the 60s. So instead, you get a private little war about the villagers and the hill people, and the Klingons fighting a proxy war against the Federation on this one planet by the Klingons were arming the villagers with weapons. And Kirk comes down and finds his friend Tyree, and they have to keep the balance of power, which is exactly what was going on in Southeast Asia. So you're telling a really interesting story that definitely related back to something that was going on in our world today within the context of science fiction action adventure. And that's how they were able to get away with those things. And the episodes of Discovery don't seem to be, when I watch them, I'm like, I'm watching B-grade science fiction gussied up with an A-list Tiffany television budget. And I'm like, what am I supposed to glean from these stories? What does it mean? You know, I mean, they make such a big deal about inclusion, you know, and Colbert and Stamets, right? You want to show, I would be really interested to see a really adult, and I'm not talking about sexual, but you know, you have a same-sex couple, the first same-sex couple we've seen ongoing in Star Trek. Well, what does that mean? You know, how is that different from a normal cis couple? You know, what does it mean? And I would love to see a story that, there was famously the story that David Gerrold wrote that was later adapted for a fan film, but he wrote a script called Blood and Fire that was for TNG. It was never produced, but it was about a same-sex couple, and one of the crewmen, a member of that couple was killed, and kind of like what happened on Discovery, but what are the results of that, and how do we examine that in the context of a science fiction action adventure show? You know, people complain about the TNG episode The Outcast because they say, for those of you who don't remember, there's a genderless society. Riker shows up, and there's a member of that society that feels that they are being attracted to one sex, Riker, but that they feel more female. And it was an early examination of those issues. A lot of people now complain about that show because they cast a woman in the role as opposed to a man. Like, if they had a genderless society and they had a man play that character, and it was Riker that fell in love with this genderless character that was portrayed by a man, it would have been really edgy. But at the time, in the early 90s. They couldn't have gotten away with that. But they did the story, and then they later went on and did things like The Host and Rejoined, and they examined those kinds of issues in really fascinating ways. And I would like to see that dealt with more. You know, the character of Burnham, she's now a superhero. I mean, she was disgraced. She committed mutiny against her captain, but oh wait, we've kind of forgotten all about that. Wouldn't it have been interesting to see a full season arc of her redemption? How did she have to claw her way back? I mean, we got a couple episodes of her feeling bad, but then hey, now she's super Michael Burnham.
Yeah, she got over it.
Yeah, she got over it. And I would love to have seen a whole episode, a whole show about her redemption.
Yeah. One of the things actually I always point out is the actress Emily Coates, who plays the redhead on the bridge. She has the implant over her left eye.
Detmer.
Keila Detmer. I just call her Lisa Left Eye, and on Twitter she actually said that was funny. So props to her. We always bring that up. But she shows when Michael Burnham shows up on episode 3 on the Discovery. She's actually there in the shuttle bay, and there's no water. And she was on the Shinzu when everything went to hell, and there's no, what are you doing here? Why are you showing up now? How dare you show your face around here? And it just seems like these are science fiction writers that, and I always say there's this huge problem now, especially in science fiction and in comics, and this is true in Marvel comics as well. You have writers who not only thumb their nose at the fans, but they always say, these are fictional characters. We can do whatever we want. No, you can't. That's the biggest issue I always have with a lot of this stuff. You cannot do what you want, especially when you're playing in someone else's sandbox.
Yeah. Well, I guess the frustrating thing for me is that having grown up reading Star Trek novels, and look, the people that wrote Star Trek novels in the first place were writing Star Trek novels because they loved Star Trek. They didn't get into writing Star Trek novels because they thought they were going to make $1 million. They might have wanted to be writers, so they started out plying their craft while they're writing Star Trek novels. But the people that wrote Star Trek novels spent a long time thinking about the universe and how to make these things seem real. And you go back and you read the books of Diane Duane, or you read Peter David's Star Trek novels, or you read David Mack's or Christopher Bennett's, these guys and girls that wrote Star Trek novels, and they did such a wonderful job of examining the universe. I mean, the best Star Trek novels are not just great Star Trek stories, but they're great novels in general. And so if you had that experience growing up reading these books and having these experiences in other mediums, but still you're experiencing great Star Trek stories, I don't understand why then that the Star Trek that we're getting, the most expensive Star Trek that we're getting these stories that feel, they don't feel like they feel like they're first of all written by a committee, and it's everything but the kitchen sink is going into them, and there's no sense that what I'm being given is worth consuming. You know, I mean, you feel like when you watch your favorite movie, when you watch a great movie, you really feel that the creators knew what the story was they wanted to tell, and they were sharing it with you. Just like the original scriptwriters of Star Trek would write these great stories that sometimes, sure, Balance of Terror is a riff on a submarine like Run Silent, Run Deep. Of course. But you still got these great classical stories, you know, Conscience of the King. Not a great first season Star Trek episode, the one about Kodos the Executioner, but still you feel like, okay, when that story was over, you feel you got something out of it, that your life was now better that story had been told to you. But I don't feel that way. Even Enterprise, when there's an Enterprise episode called Cogenitor, that's actually about a race, of this really great race. They find this examining a star. They run it. It's like a first contact story, but you find out during the course of this that these lovely people have a third gender they need to procreate with. It's a 3-gendered species, but that third gender is completely like they treat that third gender with utter disdain. And Trip is just beside himself. He can't believe that any smart sentient a species would treat a third gender the way they're treating these people. They completely treat them like garbage, and it goes from there. And that's a really interesting science fiction story. When it was over, you feel Trip's anger, and you as a viewer completely understand, even though he kind of goes off the reservation. He's ordered not to, but he does anyway because he knows what he's doing is the right thing. Now that was a 45-minute story, and it was an Enterprise story. It wasn't even during the Xindi arc or the 4th season, but it was a great Star Trek story. And when it was over, you learned something, and it's food for thought. You walk away. I still think about that episode, and it dealt with the third gender. So you had that. That's interesting, with all the talk about the how human beings are not binary. Well, here's a Star Trek episode that dealt with that very thing, and you felt like when the story was told that it was a fully realized story that had a beginning, a middle, and an end that enriched your life by watching it. Anybody who's never watched Enterprise, go watch the episode Cogenitor. Is it genius? No, but it's a really good episode of Star Trek.
I have to say that Enterprise in general, I think, is an underrated series. I know that's an unpopular opinion. And of course, there are really bad episodes in it, episodes that really conflict with canon. But at its best, the best episodes, they're right up there with the best of Star Trek.
Oh, yeah. And I think that a lot of, Voyager is a pretty schizophrenic show. That was the schizophrenia about Voyager. And I didn't watch it when it was first on. I was sort of adamantly against. I liked the first season, but I've gone back and I've watched a lot of Voyager episodes too. And there's a lot of really great, I think one of my favorite episodes of Voyager, there's 2 that I always talk about, Living Witness and Blink of an Eye, which are 2 great science fiction stories. I don't know how, they're great science fiction stories. I don't know. They're sort of are off-brand, off-concept stories, but they're really good. And when you watch them, you feel like, oh, I've learned something. Just like the best of Star Trek. The Star Trek has endured for 50-plus years because you feel like you're getting stories that resonate beyond the time in which they're made. And they have something to say beyond. And I want to be clear. People love Star Trek Discovery. There are people that love Star Trek Discovery, and I do not in any way, shape, or form begrudge those people. If you love Star Trek Discovery, I think it's great. I'm happy that you do. And I hope it leads you back through the rest of the Star Trek canon, because there's so much stuff that you are going to enjoy experiencing. So I don't want to take that away from anybody. We bitch and moan and complain because that's what we do as fans. But I don't want to ever say that somebody shouldn't watch Discovery. And if you do like Discovery, that doesn't mean I dislike you or think you're an idiot or a bad person. Not at all. Just like everybody has their favorite James Bond, whoever they discovered. James, if your first James Bond movie was A View to a Kill, I'd be like, oh, I'm sorry. But if you loved A View to a Kill, that's great. And if you
that's me right here.
See, I hated A View to a Kill. I'm a Bond fanatic, and I reviewed it for my high school newspaper. But there are people that View to a Kill is their first Bond movie, so we always have to be mindful of that. That there are people that, but what I want people to do is I want people to be discerning, and always bring a critical acumen to what it is that you love. And don't just, I feel like so many people just love things now because they're supposed to, by being critical of something. Oh, you're a gatekeeper, or you hate this, or you hate that. No, I just want everything to be excellent. And I go into, I didn't have my knives sharpened when Star Trek Discovery was going to come on the air. I was really excited. I get excited. Look, every episode I watch Discovery and I'm like, this episode's going to be great. And I want it to be. And I'm hoping that it will be. I've been very disappointed now for 20 episodes. 20 episodes that have cost in excess of $200 million. We've got put that in your pipe and smoke it. We've now received $200 million worth of Star Trek on television. And I ask you, have we received $200 million worth of entertainment? I don't know.
Well, that's in the eyes of the beholder. And like you brought up before, despite what people say, we do not go out and tell people don't watch the Star Trek Discovery. We don't. We never have said that. And we don't, advocate, attacking anybody over it or anything like that. It's a television show, period.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you brought up the books earlier, because there's a reason why the words canon and Bible are synonymous with IPs and television shows, is because these things are important. You can go in a different direction. You brought up Enterprise. That's a great example of how it was different from anything we've seen before, pretty much. But at the same time, it still adhered to for the most part, what was true to canon in the Bible of Star Trek, in that they didn't deviate to the point where Star Trek 09 or especially Star Trek Discovery has. And people keep bringing up the whole connection between Bad Robot and Star Trek Discovery. I don't know if there's anything more you can get into about that. They're talking about it in the chat quite a bit. I know you're short on time, but if there's anything more as far as light you can shine on that, I'm sure they'd appreciate that. Other than
I don't really know. I mean, to be honest, I wasn't, privy to any of those conversations, but I do know that, look, the way that the entertainment business works is everybody wants to get paid, and you can make, there's an ungodly amount of money. If you knew how much money you could make if you're involved with say a long running show like Big Bang Theory, we're talking, you can make hundreds of millions of dollars personally. There's a lot of money at stake here. Now, Bad Robot did not take over the Star Trek franchise in 2009 as a one-off. Star Trek had a long history of both as a feature film and as a television franchise that, by the way, ran concurrently. So the idea that, when Bad Robot made Star Trek 09, they were just thinking about making one movie. No, they weren't. Whatever deal they made sure that they could make movies and television. What's happening now under Kurtzman's watch was exactly what they wanted to have happen in 2009. We're going to take over Star Trek. We're going to make it our own, and we're going to make animated shows. We're going to make kids shows. We're going to make Section 31. We're going to do the Picard show. We're going to do all kinds of Star Trek. We're going to turn we're going to turn it into an empire. And isn't it interesting that the person that's heading all this up is the same person that wrote Star Trek 09, that came up with a story for the Countdown comic. For who? For Bad Robot. And so whatever's going on there, all of this groundwork was already established in 2000. What, it was 7 when they announced that J.J. Abrams was taking over.
Yes,
all of this was already negotiated, because CBS they wanted nothing more than to have somebody like J.J. Abrams and Bad Robot to come in and take over. I mean, he is beloved in Hollywood. He's a beloved figure, and he's made a lot of people a lot of money with his TV shows, and he continues to do so. And he's got what's it called? Episode 9, that thing he's got coming out next year or at the end of this year. It's Christmas. They got those laser swords, right? What is that thing called? There's a reason why he was given. There was a reason why J.J. Abrams was given Star Wars as well. And these are very shrewd people, and they have the best lawyers in the business. And what we're seeing now is the manifestation of what began when Bad Robot took over the Star Trek franchise. I just wish they had a Kevin Feige that loved Kevin Feige. Remember, Kevin Feige produced 13 Marvel films before he worked in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Before Iron Man came out in 2008, Feige worked on 13 different Marvel projects and saw what worked and what didn't work. How can we stay true to our core values and our core IP and still change things around? If we're going to do Age of Ultron, it doesn't have to be exactly like Age of Ultron, and Civil War doesn't have to be exactly like the Civil War comics, but we're going to adhere to the spirit of that. There's a reason why Ed Brubaker's run on the Winter Soldier was used. I mean, the funny thing about Marvel is, what do? They go back and they look into their comic book history to get the ideas for their upcoming movies. I mean, Star Trek CBS has the same thing. They've got comic book history and novels in addition to all the TV and movies that were made, but they've got an infinitude practically of material to draw from that's already sitting there. But that would entail somebody going, maybe we should look at this. Here's the 25 best Star Trek books. Why don't we read them? See what's in there. I mean, they've got Kirsten Beyer, who is a wonderful Star Trek novelist, who wrote this week's episode. but I guarantee you that whatever she wrote was not what they shot. I would love to see. She's been surprisingly silent. I would love somebody to go back and do an interview with her about her experiences. But you know what? She went from being a Star Trek novelist to being a producer or a writer on a Star Trek show. She's getting some fat money, some cheddar that would never get writing Star Trek books. I mean, she's making new Star Trek now. She's working on the Picard series. How great's that? And more power to her. But I have to jump. I've been on too long. I'm late.
Yes. Well,
anyway, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your amazing insights. We'd love to have you on again.
Oh, well, I love you guys. And you know, sure, people will always take you to task for wildly speculating about things and all that. But who isn't wildly speculating on the internet? How many Avengers Endgame theories? We get 5 a day. You know, from internet sites. At least you guys are going out and doing some digging and trying to. I think you guys should keep doing what you're doing. And I know that you guys come from a position of the love of Star Trek and the love of Star Wars, and that's always apparent in what you guys are doing.
Thank you. That means a lot. We always try to go for the full context and the bigger picture.
Yeah, because all we want is the same thing. We just want great Star Trek. That's it. That's it. That's all anybody wants is great Star Trek. And what's wrong with that? They've got 10 million, 12 million, 15 million an episode to make Star Trek. With that kind of money, it should be great. It should be great. But it's not. And until it is, we'll be mad and angry and bitch and moan on the internet. So, but I think we should bitch and moan on the internet with respect and with appreciation and always be inclusive of everyone. I find the only time I get personally attacked is when I criticize Star Trek Discovery. And that's when people come at me and call me names and things like that. I don't ever get called names because I preach inclusion. You know, whenever I do my talks on the Burnett work on my show, when I do my Robservations chats, I'm always like, hey, man, we're all here because we love the same things. We're all part of the Post Geek Singularity community. Everybody's welcome. But, you know, when I get mad about things, people are like, well, you're a gatekeeper and all this. No, somebody called me the gatekeeper of verisimilitude, which I will accept. But what I do love is when somebody likes something and it leads them down the path of finding more things. I mean, it's great that we have a 50-year plus legacy of Star Trek history of shows and movies and comics and novels and Star Trek Online and now Star Trek Discovery. There's so much to discover, and there's so much richness out there, especially when it comes to Star Trek, that I would hope that everybody understands that it does come out of love, and we are trying to share our enthusiasm, and we just want it to be better. But because you guys like it, that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with liking things. There's nothing wrong with liking things. Liking things is good, you know? But that doesn't mean that other people can't like them. And we should all be able to talk about it. So on that note, I have to go.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Hopefully
so
we
much.
can talk to you soon about Axonar and so much more. Sorry, Rob, I didn't mean to.
Oh, I've got a lot to talk about when it comes there. And by the way, I don't hate anybody involved in Axonar either. That was something we were gonna. People always throwing that back in my face. Oh, you dislike Star Trek Discovery because of Axonar? I'm like, no. You know, I build starship models on the weekends. I mean, Axonar to me was like building a starship model, but it'd be a movie instead. It's just another manifestation of my love of the Star Trek franchise. So, and I can't wait to see what they come up with for the 2 15-minute movies. But they need to make those 2 15-minute movies. So, but yeah, on that note though, I guess I will take my leave of you all. And thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for joining us.
All hours.
All right. I'll talk to you guys soon.
All right. Take care. Bye.
I'll see you.
All right. How was that a treat for everyone who's still with us?
That was awesome.
That was awesome indeed. Yeah.
Send this one to the Museum of Radio and Television. This is going to be a keeper right here. So.
Yeah, I saw some comments that this is the best live chat we ever done. And of course, when we have such prestigious company as the Robert Meyer Burnett, and everyone who doesn't know his extensive history with Star Trek and film and TV in general, You should look that up because he has done so much more than merely being a guest star on John Campia's show and Collider Heroes before that. Guys, before we round out, we have some super chats, don't we?
Yes, we do have a couple. To start off with, we had Captain Hare right at the very beginning with $5. He says, a toast to the STD suffering yet to come. Make sure to get some cream for that and some alcohol of your choice. So thank you so much, Captain Hare, for that $5 super chat. Rob, you want to take the next one? Or?
Yes, we have a $10 super chat from Lone Wolf 79. Hi, guys. I have to ask if Emmy, Midnight's Edge, Midnight's Edge After Dark is going to put these podcasts on other news on some offline service. I work underground and I miss these deep insights. We have 500 views. Okay. Yeah. Andre, that's more a question for you. There's always plans, to do that.
Yeah, there's always plans. We're gonna have to finalize some plans like that over the course of the next month because the EU have decided that they're going to be really, really difficult about this whole YouTube thing. With we're going to get back to that in further videos. There are no solid plans as of this moment, but there's going to be. So just stick with us and you shall be informed in due course.
Mm-hmm.
And also we can move into the next super chat, which I believe is from Santo Dominus, who sent us a $20 Canadian super chat, saying, here's to another awesome live stream. Andre, Rob, Tom, and special guest Robert Meyer Burnett. Hail to the fandom. Yes, absolutely. Hail to the fandom.
We also got a $5 super chat from Kush. All he did was give us a live long and prosper. So
live long and prosper, Kush.
Yes, live long and prosper.
And we just got one right now from Rolo Cat, a £2 super chat. Says, thank you, live long and prosper. Well, thank you, Rolo Cat.
It's actually €2, but
€2. I'm sorry, did I say pounds?
It's €2.
Yeah, €2.
It's €2. So yeah.
Anyway, I knew what I meant.
This I guess was the highlight of everything associated with Star Trek Discovery so far, wasn't it? Or before we round out, Tom and Rob, what are your guys' thoughts on the first 5 episodes of Star Trek Discovery, as they then mark the end of the Harberts and Berg reign as showrunners? And from next week onwards, we're in Alex Kurtzman territory, where he had the complete and total control. So just quick summary, what do you think of them?
Well, I always say every week, there's no chance of it getting worse, but somehow they surprise me. So, oh boy, like I said, just when you think you've seen it all, they throw a new one at you every week, and I'm pretty sure it's going to continue well into the Kurtzman era. Tom?
Well, the first 5 episodes, God, we went from the best episode of the show entirely so far with the second episode to the absolute worst episode in the third. And the last couple episodes were just icing on that cake, I guess. I don't know. Because as much as they try harder and harder to be more and more Star Trek-like, they try and gain moments and stuff out of us that they haven't earned. They haven't earned any of the character moments. They haven't earned any of our concern for any of the characters. Shit, even in the last episode, excuse my French, but, that last episode was just so silly, and we knew nobody was going to die, and then they end up bringing back one of the characters that they did kill in the first place. And once they start doing that in very convoluted ways, it just drives me nuts. And we've got a couple of super chats that just popped up there if one of you guys want to take those.
Yeah, certainly. I can take the first one. The first one is from Kilroy Was Here, who sent a $5 super chat saying, "Hail Midnight's Edge. You guys should take the audio from the interview and make it a new video, either here or on Midnight's Edge After Dark. That was an amazing interview." You know what? I've been thinking that this whole time, so that's exactly what we're going to do. So, yeah. And then John T-Net sends us, is this Hong Kong dollars?
Yes.
Hong Kong dollars. Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
250 Hong Kong dollars. Thank you. I agree with your guest. We should not laugh at and put down people that think STD is good. I try to teach my child not to laugh or look down on those who are mentally handicapped. It's not right. Yeah, I think we can all agree with that. Yeah, nice one. Seriously though, I agree that we shouldn't put down the people just for liking Star Trek Discovery. But usually the problem is the other way around. It's the people that like Star Trek Discovery that put down the people who don't, and who put down every Star Trek that is not Discovery. At least that's my experience. But yeah, nice comment.
And
Rob, you want to take the next one?
yeah, we have Vincent Repeat, who has sent us $2.99 Australian, I believe that is Australian dollars.
Yes.
There was always time for lubricant watching STD. Ooh.
Oh, I love that reference. That's a reference to Evolution. Great movie by the same director who gave us Ghostbusters.
I would say it is kind of a de facto Ghostbusters 3 in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I love that movie. So yeah.
All righty. Unless anybody wants to add any more to that, which we're totally open for more super chats. We love them. They always help us out here at the channel, as we say all the time.
Yeah, and
you guys couldn't make this happen.
Yeah, and also to anyone wondering, no, CBS ain't paying us quat.
Yeah,
Neither is Disney.
But I didn't want to get into that. We are completely independent. We have absolutely no sponsors. Our only sponsors are you guys out there when you watch our videos and share them, and people watch the commercials and whatnot, and our patrons who we love immensely. They do everything they can for us too as well, and everything they do helps us make things better and do what we can here at Midnight's Edge. And I want to, of course, say congratulations real quick to Robb and Andre and give them a special thank you for making me a part of this whole thing, since we've now crossed 100,000 subscribers on the channel. So I want to thank you and all of you guys out there for making it possible, of course. And a special thanks to all the mods on our Facebook group who work so hard to keep the group, from basically killing itself, because y'all have different opinions, and that's what this is all about. And as much as the fake news media out there, not to coin to steal a term from certain people, but a lot of people out there spread a lot of bullshit about Midnight's Edge, and it's not true. We do not try to squash others' opinions. There's there's nobody in our group going, you can't have an opinion different than anything or anybody on any of the shows or anybody in the group, or what's popular opinion in anybody's, views. But we want is a conversation, and I think that's what Robert Meyer Burnett really brought to the table today. Was he opened up the conversation even more, because he got us kind of past a lot of the stuff that we've been reporting to this point, and he didn't confirm all of it, and he couldn't necessarily confirm all of it, but from what he said and from what we know to be true at this point, it's gotten to a point, okay, so where do we go from here? And is what's to come going to be good or bad? We don't know yet. I have a lot of hope for Picard, because it's one of the few things that won't be hindered so much by any kind of 25% difference, if there is one, that is, adhered to this universe that we're dealing with now.
It's going to be hindered by other things altogether,
exactly.
such as
that's the other problem.
But
there's that and other issues that we can't. I don't want to get into too much, because, like I said, there's things that Robert said that we know a lot about too, that we've heard from other sources as well. So, but we don't want to divulge all of that right now. I don't want to step on anything Andre wants to do. I just wanted to take that moment to thank you guys for making me a part of this. Thank all you listeners for making it possible. And here's hoping to not only 100,000 more, but 1 million more. So there we go.
Yes.
There you go.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But I think we got some more super chats that we have to address after your eloquent words.
It was a rant. You can say it.
No, but it's one I really appreciate, because as you said, we just crossed 100,000 subscribers, and that's awesome for all of us. Carry on, Rob.
I'm sorry. I was about to say, actually, we were informed somebody said on the Facebook group that we crossed 100,000 subscribers, and then we and then we lost 700 subscribers, and then we crossed 100,000 subscribers again. So we've crossed 100,000 subscribers, both coming and going. So that's an accomplishment right there.
I think that was a YouTube glitch, but yeah.
In either event, that's pretty awesome. And I too would also like to extend my thanks to everyone who's in the Facebook group, and especially to the moderators who's making that work when I haven't got time for that myself, regrettably. But let's move on to some super chat, because I'm sure that they are waiting. The DCV Titan sent us a $5 Canadian super chat saying, just when you think STD and regressives have hit peak stupidity, the regressives say, hold my soy. Yeah, well, yeah, I guess. I guess.
Not much more to say.
Not much more to say about that. Oh, and here's a good one. Captain Hare sends us a $5 American super chat saying, Andre, have you caught up on STD and how much screaming was involved? Well, I have to say, first and foremost, in my defense, this weekend I've been working my ass off all the time on the next editorial about Captain Marvel, which is going to come to you relatively soon, plus the 100,000 celebration video. In between that, I have done my best to catch up. So I have seen 3 episodes so far, but I always tell myself, I make Rob and Tom see it, so I don't have to. So we're good.
Well, and I also want to extend a huge thanks to Mecha Random 42, who does so much for us, mostly over on Midnight's Edge After Dark, but she also helps out on the main channel from time to time. And, you know, she watches the show with us and suffers through it as well. So
yeah, thanks to all of you. And that's like this horrible state that you have something with this budget. It's something that should be incredible. We should be talking about it as if it was Game of Thrones. We should be doing that, we the fans, instead of them, the producers, having to say that this is like Game of Thrones when it really isn't. They only wish it was.
Yes. So we just got another super chat come down the pipe.
There was another one we missed just before that too, I think.
Well, okay. Well,
yeah,
let's go back a little bit.
The next one after that, I believe, is from Harle Kino 78, who sends us a CHF. Is that Swiss franc?
Swiss francs, yeah.
Swiss francs, yeah. 5 Swiss francs. Thank you. Hi, Midnight's Edge. Isn't the core problem a rights issue and Bad Robot wanting to employ its own people instead of Star Trek veterans? Well, yes and no. You have a rights issue, but within that rights issue, you could still have made a great show. That's what I think is the greatest frustration here. Because yes, even if Bad Robot, whatever name they go under, have hijacked Star Trek, they could still do it good. It could be 25% different, assuming that figure is correct. We actually only have the guy of Eves, the designer, to go on. We know that there's a certain percentage difference, and then we think it's 25 based on that. But there is a certain level of difference there. But even within that, you could still make excellent Star Trek. That they haven't is exclusively down to the vision of the people who have been working on it, which simply have had the wrong vision. You don't have to have Star Trek veterans working on it. You only have to have really skilled people who know and understand Star Trek. If you don't have that, that's when you really need Star Trek veterans. As it stands, you have neither. So, yeah. And then
I always point out Gilmore Girls writers. There's part of your problem right there.
Right. And I've said it, I don't know how many times. I'm one of those where I have no issues with like cosmetic changes to things, as long as the story's good, or as long as it's not so crazy and out there and you don't explain it. Star Trek is, at least in the past, even when they've done a lot of cosmetic changes, they've gone out of their way to explain certain things a lot of times. You know, in this instance, we have something that's too close to the Kelvin verse, too far from canon, that as we know it, So, and not only that, we've had way too many red flags pop up here and there. The reporting we've done, the research we've done, what Robert Burnett has said, what our other sources have said. In conclusion, there's obviously something that happened when Kurtzman came on board that brought Bad Robot into the equation, whether it was Bad Robot proper or not. There is stuff, if you go back and look, that if you look far enough with the Wayback Machine, that you can find Bad Robot's name attached to Star Trek Discovery, then all of a sudden Secret Hideout shows up.
Yeah, that basically, it was down to the deal making that was done between Moonves and Bad Robot. It's something that we kind of gloss over in the magnum opus video. That's simply because it's so complex that it would require a 20-minute video all of its own, and it had to do with the two parties almost suing each other.
I was just going to say that.
Breach of agreements and stuff like that, and kind of like the truce and settlement that was reached was that Moonves allowed Bad Robot, or the people behind Bad Robot, whatever name they go under, a stake in, well, not necessarily a stake, that came later, but that he allowed them to make Discovery under the alternate Paramount license. So that's how that changed.
Yeah, which Moonves and CBS were willing to give up in exchange for something to sell CBS All Access, basically.
Yeah. And that's also what Robert Meyer Burnett alluded to, that to begin with, which he knew from his source, when Star Trek Discovery initially started out, it was meant to be a prime. Sorry, it wasn't meant to be a prime series. It was meant to be a canon series taking place before the legitimate original series. That changed when Moonves did this deal making. And Kurtzman came aboard, and the project was hijacked and suddenly was moved from the canon universe to the prime timeline.
There we go.
There you go. We got another super chat. Actually, Tim Riggs, $10 super chat. Thank you very much. I first found Emmy thanks to Trankgate documentaries you guys put out. I really appreciate the hard work you guys put into those. Here's to your continued success and growth. Thank you very much, Tim Riggs.
Yes, thank you. And you should check out the 100,000 subscriber celebration video that's coming soon. I'm going to go into a little bit of the backstage or behind the scenes involved in making the Trankgate videos. So that should be fun.
That's neat, because that was something I wasn't pretty much privy to. So there you go.
All right.
I'm looking forward to that, and I'm part of the crew. There you go.
Yes, plenty of surprises all around.
Yeah.
Let's see. What else do we have to cover today?
Was that the last of the super chats? I think.
I think it's last super chats.
Yeah, I think we are starting. And just give me 1 second to check and make sure that we didn't miss anyone. I think that we have them all. Just give me one moment.
So anyway,
that should be about it. So with that, I think that we can call it the day, or call it the night in my particular case, due to time zones and everything. Actually, there was one question here that I think was not a super chat, but I saw it anyway. It was Eric Kelly who asked, Andre, can you ask Robert Meyer Burnett to come back after STD ends? Yes, absolutely. I'll have him on any time that we can, because
yes, and we also give him an open door on After Dark as well. So anytime he wants to join in,
anytime he wants to join, he's welcome. We've been huge fans of his for a long time. Oh, and the red shirts as well. I agree. I've actually never spoken with the red shirts myself, but I've listened to every single one of the podcasts that Tom and Rob have had with them, both on their channel and on After Dark. And in my opinion, they've been excellent. So yeah, I'd love to have them back anytime we can get them. They're welcome too.
Yes. We absolutely love having Q Storm, Greg, and Big Sexy on anytime.
They're awesome, yeah.
Yeah.
And those are guys that they, for the most part, liked the first season. I mean, not all of them, but and Q Storm's kind of coming around to the other side. And
yeah, that's the funny thing, hearing his evolution, because like he started out the super proponent of Discovery, and then listen to him in our latest video where he appears.
He's still not a fan of the Orville, though. He's still not a fan of the Orville.
Yeah, well, that's fine.
That's his prerogative.
Yeah, ActionCom gave us a $20 super chat. Thank you so very much. Concerning the Bad Robot license situation, it comes down to if it could exist in an alternate dimension, it's canon. Dr. McCoy could be a large talking cobra, call it an alternate universe, and it's BR canon, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Basically, yes. Yeah. That's why we bring up the Tribble, because the Tribble was something that they have in Into Darkness. If this is what you're kind of getting at too, Into Darkness as we know a Tribble, and they don't, they had that as the original Tribble. Now, if they wanted to sell a Tribble under the Bad Robot license, they would have to change it. They would have to change it somehow, give it eyeballs, give it a butt, whatever, just to change it 25% basically. And the reason the 25% keeps coming up is we have a lot of different places where that comes up. And even Mecha Random sent me something a while back that also shows something about the 25% difference, and I'll bring that up here real quick.
Yeah. But to clarify real quickly, though, yes, everything under the Bad Robot banner, that's made explicitly as a multiverse. Now, of course, you've had a multiverse in the Next Generation too, but in Next Generation. But basically, within the two different licenses, you have the original canon, which was made by Desilu and Paramount, and is now owned by CBS due to mergers and stuff like that we went through. There you have the original canon, and then you have the legal division between CBS and Viacom. On the other side of that, you have the Prime timeline, you have the Kelvin timeline, and if you have the Dr. McCoy Lodge talking Cobra, then that universe is also going to be part of the Bad Robot license, or the Paramount license to be technical. Is it canon? Well, yes, in a sense it's canon, but only canon to the Paramount license. It's not canon to the original series and the original canon. Those are two legally separate things. So there are two canons. One canon is a multiverse, the other is one timeline, basically, with guest appearance of other universes.
All right, and here, of course, I don't know if you can see it on the screen right now, is what she sent me. And this was during a video that was taken from a Comic-Con, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, or some kind of presentation like that. And here you see the note where they had to have 25% different between the two ships. So there you go. There's that. Another thing on top of what Eve said, of course, in his Facebook post, which was retracted. We have to point out that it was retracted. But oddly enough, CBS bought comicbook.com right around the same time that whole thing went down, which is really strange.
Yes, which is why we call it propaganda arm now.
Yeah,
yes.
that's the word I was about to say, yes. But guys, we've been going on for quite long enough. With that, I would like to thank everyone who joined us. It's been a blast to be here with all of you. And it's been a blast to have Robert Meyer Burnett come join us. And we hope this is the first of many, many more appearances by him.
Yes. So, Tom, always great. Thanks everyone in the chat. Thank you for the super chats, everybody. Parting words, Andre, Tom.
I just want to say thank you all for supporting us and taking us to 100,000 subscribers. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Live long and prosper. Phone home. Go ahead, make my day. Thank you for joining us here on Midnight's Edge for the special with special guest Robert Meyer Burnett. And we will catch you next time.